Welcome to the Child Free Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, Certified Financial Planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast. Hey, Child Free Wealth listeners. Today we're diving into the hidden downsides of passion-driven work, how it fuels overwork, blurs personal identity, and even can blind us to burnout. Our guest, Jennifer Gray, is a licensed mental health therapist and entrepreneurial wellness specialist who helps high achievers build sustainable careers without sacrificing their well-being. So, Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, Bree, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Can you just start out more by telling us kind of how you got into this career and who you typically work with, how you work with people?
Sure, yeah. I actually started my career journey in finance similarly. I was just really good at numbers, really enjoyed it. But through my own personal therapeutic journey, just kind of realized this isn't quite what I want to do for the rest of my life. I more enjoy sort of the personal side of things and the data side. So eventually went back to graduate school to become a licensed therapist. And so now I'm multi-state licensed. Pretty much realized right out of the game that there was this unique area that wasn't being served in mental health, which was business, money, entrepreneurship. Although most therapists are entrepreneurs, they don't typically have the business skills that are really necessary to make a business not only fulfilling, but sustainable. And so I quickly saw this kind of niche here, just being on both sides of the coin, and recognized, yeah, let's do it. Let's help folks have a more fulfilled career, personal life, the whole thing, so that we can move forward, not only better for us, but also better for the people we're serving.
Yeah. And I think it was a good point out there. You said a lot of therapists are entrepreneurs, but they don't take care of themselves. So do you work only with therapists who are entrepreneurs or any sort of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I work with any sort of entrepreneur, usually folks who are in service industry. So most likely they're not selling a product, they're selling a service, or they're selling something that they specifically offer. But yeah, I get lots of people from all types of different industries, all types of different businesses, especially folks who tend to trend ambitious, high achieving, things like that.
Can you tell us more about what that is? Because I know my definition of ambitious, high achieving, all those things, and many other people do too. But how do you define that?
Yeah, folks who wake up and are sort of ready to engage with something outside of just their personal life. So whether they have an organization they're connected with, or again, they're entrepreneurs, they wake up and they're just excited about making connections, making, a sort of place in the world for themselves, but also having an impact on the world. And not that you can only have an impact if you're an entrepreneur, certainly, but most entrepreneurs have that bone in them where they're very passion driven. It's very important for them. And so these are folks who tend to maybe overwork themselves because they have that passionate bone. And so, yeah, folks who are ambitious are typically the ones that right out of the gate, want to do this work. They want to live a fulfilling personal life as well, but they're really driven by things that happen career-wise.
So you're saying me waking up in the middle of the night to work on things for clients because it just pops into my brain is probably not the right route to go?
I would say probably not the best. The unique thing about being an entrepreneur is you do get to set your own hours, right? But that's also kind of the benefit, is that maybe we want to make sure we're setting the hours that are best for us.
Hey, Child Free Wealth listeners, it's Bree. I highly encourage you to schedule a Child Free Wealth checkup. During this time, you're going to get a couple of forms to fill out that include your life and financial plan. We'll review them, and then we're going to have a meeting and go through them with you. We're going to give you some advice and things to work on and talk through things to make your finances simpler so your life can be amazing. You can schedule yours by going to our website, childfreewealth.com, and clicking the Schedule Now button. Yeah, it actually doesn't really bother me that much because sometimes I'll just wake up and think about those things. But it was funny, my spouse the other day goes, I don't understand you. I don't understand how you can wake up and just go into your office. I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, but then middle of the day, I don't. It's just funny to hear that and kind of learn about different people and how they interact with the world and their work and their personal life. When you're working with these people, what's usually the first step they come to you? And why do they come to you?
Yeah, because I'm a therapist for entrepreneurs is kind of how I define myself. Most folks come to me because they're just like not feeling fulfilled. Like maybe their business is fairly successful, but they're just not having the relationships that they want to have. And so they tend to say to me, hey, there's something going on with my business. And I say, okay, but let's look at all aspects of who you are, right? So the business, but also the personal side, the relational side. How is that functioning? If you're struggling to make the connections you want to make, if you're overworking, folks tend to typically notice those things in themselves. And oftentimes when they come to me, they are able to be honest with themselves about those things too. But the difficult thing that I tend to notice with my clients is that being a high achiever, you're usually pretty intellectual. You're usually pretty smart. If you could outthink a lot of the problems that folks bring to me, they probably wouldn't need to come to me. But oftentimes it's a much deeper issue that's driving what's happening for them. So it's either a nervous system issue, they're dysregulated, or they just have some like deep-seated beliefs about things that continue to keep them stuck. And so the changes they try to make that they keep bringing to me tend to just not last very long. They're not consistent, they're not sustainable. And so they'll try something and they end up getting burnt out more because they're just kind of putting more on their plate as opposed to be addressing what's on the plate specifically.
Yeah. Okay. So you said they maybe have tried to work on it before and they're addressing all these things, but not like on the plate. How do they know when to come see you? Is it because I've been in therapy for years and can speak to that and kind of know what that's like? And also I know when I'm not going as much, I have people who'll be like, listen, make an appointment now. But not everybody has that. Are they just realizing it themselves? Is it somebody pushing them, whether it be a spouse, a friend, a coworker, anything like that? What gets them to take that step? Because that could be hard.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. I honestly think it's a little combination of both. Usually the folks I work with, they are problem solvers for themselves. And so they tend to not ask a whole lot of other people what's going on or what they can get support with. And so they tend to notice there's some issue for themselves. But that also really blends in with what's happening outside of them. And maybe they're having some anxiety every time they meet this specific client, or maybe their partner, when they're done working, is like upset that they're not spending enough time together. And so it tends to be a little balance of both. Folks tend to notice like something doesn't quite feel right. I'm not enjoying life the way I really want to. And then to some degree, they are getting feedback from people around them that are saying like, hey, you're not showing up the way I really need you to, or the way I want you to, or something doesn't feel right here in their own perspective. And they'll communicate that to that person. And then eventually those things, again, if the person can't kind of address it on their own, eventually those things just continue to stand out so much that they have to come find someone like me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. I think sometimes people around us, whether or not we realize it, can be some of the best breeds on us because we don't like to ask for help at times. With that, I've had conversations recently with some people and they said, I really don't like asking for help. And how do I accept that help then when somebody points out or when I realize that I do need help? How can I accept it? Because sometimes the acceptance part of it can be incredibly difficult. I know I am not somebody who likes to accept help. And I had this conversation with someone else recently, and also an entrepreneur, and they said, I really don't like accepting help. You see it, we're feeling it, we're experiencing it, we recognize it, we can try to take the next step. But even then, once that foot's in the door, there can be a lot of resistance to change there and really accepting that help from somebody. Because it's one thing to go into therapy and just say, this is great, but I'm sure as a therapist, people can bullshit. So I'm getting around that. What's that like?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really important point, right? Like any deep work, especially therapy, but most deep work, you really have to be showing up to it for it to be successful. And so you can come see me, but I'm not the driver of this bus here. I'm only helping you navigate with the map that I have. And so an important thing is sometimes it's just time, right? We have to like talk about these things, get used to how uncomfortable they are. And that can just over time bring us to a natural place of saying, I am ready to like look at this a little bit more seriously. The other thing that I think most people tend to really enjoy about my style is being a therapist, and I think tend to seek me out because of it, just being upfront and honest. Like, hey, you've come to me with this problem. I'm seeing this thing. I'm seeing you really resistant to it. Let's talk about the resistance. Like, what's going on there? Is it fear of control? Is it fear of your life completely needing to change? That's the biggest fear that most people come in and say, if I look at this, my whole life is going to have to change. And oftentimes that's not the case. Maybe some significant parts need to, but truly just being honest and saying, let's look at the thing that's causing you the discomfort, not necessarily the thing that's like the long-term change, right? And so let's look at that resistance. Let's talk about it. Most of the time we're avoiding that discomfort of the resistance, like that discomfort of having to look at this thing. Once we can get past that, looking at the thing tends to not be as scary as what we thought it was. And so I'm very upfront with folks. Hey, let's talk about what's going on for you. Let's maybe do some, again, nervous system regulation. So utilizing a somatic therapy like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is EMDR. It's a fairly known therapy nowadays, but doing something that's like going to help set our nervous system into a place where they're more accepting of this information. Because over time, we are really great as humans at shutting down things that make us feel uncomfortable and just like shoving them into a hole or into a corner of our life that we never have to look at. And honestly, most people recognize that when they start to just gently look at those things, just have curiosity about them, a lot of that discomfort goes away and it becomes much more accessible to knowledge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in getting through there and being okay with that, to confront it. I know I've had times over the years where my therapist has said, Bree, do you want to talk about this? My answer is, hell no, we are not talking about that right now. Maybe in a couple months I'll consider it, but maybe not. So hey, Child Free Wealth listeners, it's Bree. If you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, be sure to get on it, where each week we send out information regarding what's going on in the world of child-free life and finances. You can sign up by finding the link in our description.
It's so important that your therapist at least says that to you, and respects that maybe you're not ready to talk about it. But the important thing is bringing it back, right? And saying, hey, you didn't want to talk about this a couple of months ago, but I'm hearing you talk about it again. So why don't we look at what's going on? Are you ready now? And again, sometimes people just need time with things. We all just need time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing when we're doing life and financial plans for clients. There'll be things that clients are really ready to talk about, and there'll be other things I'll bring it up and they're not there yet. They don't want to discuss it, and that's fine. So it goes on a list of things we need to circle back around to in the future. But being able to have that open and honest conversation and feeling okay to say that is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say financial therapy clients are probably one of my favorite. I mean, certainly I love most industries that come to me, but, the work you do as a financial therapist is just so intimate. And I don't think people recognize that all the time. And it's not too different than the intimacy that happens in therapy. And so there's a lot of overlap there that happens where you just got to give people a chance and an opportunity, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be honest and upfront about what you're experiencing on your end of things.
I think honesty and being upfront about it is the number one thing that can make such a difference. And I've seen times where people feel ashamed of different things. They're worried about different things. They don't really want to be honest about it because they're afraid of judgment. It's important to know that my job, and then of course your job, we don't come at any of this from a place of judgment. We're just coming from it from a place of truly wanting to help. And the way we can do that is if both parties are being honest and upfront about things. Because if you don't have that to start, it's not going to be a good relationship, good working relationship.
Yeah, that's an incredible point. Like that's probably the number one thing that's going to build that like trust and ability to make that connection is just being open and upfront and vulnerable to some degree.
Yeah, we've talked about once I get there and get in the door, but what was really fascinating to me when Reach Out was talking about the downsides of passion-driven work and maybe disconnecting passion from our work. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult to disconnect passion, right? I mean, passion is just so exciting. It fills up the body. We want to move forward with it. But when we are, sort of fueling our work and our career by passion, that can be really beautiful and really important, right? But it can also end up feeling unnatural to stop because we're so excited, because it feels so good. And so it can also fuel overwork. Folks who are very passion driven, they can sometimes get lost in the mindset that hardworking means that's their impact, right? And so they're staying up late They're doing all the hours, they're stretching themselves really thin, but actual successful impact comes from sustainable work. So how do we do this in a way that's going to take care of ourselves? So again, that we can offer a better experience to whoever we're connecting with, whoever we're working with. It can be a bit tricky for folks when they come in and say, this is my passion, right? This is why I started a business, or this is why I got into this career. And I say, okay, great. Let's not get rid of that, but let's just use it better to our advantage.
What does it look like to use it better?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing is, when you have better boundaries, right? So like you're making sure that your passion isn't kind of getting out of control. When you have better boundaries, that's going to be easier to show up differently in the other parts of the other roles that you have. I always say, if we are spending so much time in this one role, it can be easy for us to get confused that maybe this is also our identity, right? This passionate thing that we're experiencing, that we're engaging with, that we want to wake up and do as soon as want to start the day. Like that's really beautiful, but you need to ensure that you're like enjoying, cultivating the other roles in your life, because you're not just a passionate person. You're not just a business owner. You're a parent, you're a sister, you're a friend, you're whoever. You really need to identify what those roles are, because if you're going to get into a space where you're constantly being fueled by your passion, that's great, that's amazing, but you also don't know where to draw boundaries because maybe you're not paying attention to the other roles that are happening in your life. That can be really important to say, hey, where do we need to make some stopping points? Where do we need to have some better internal boundaries? Maybe we need to be more upfront and honest with the people that we're connecting with about what we can give and what we cannot give. And all of those things ensure that we can keep the passion fueled. We can keep it burning as bright as it once did. If we don't, then we're going to quickly get burnt out. And then the thing that we're passionate about, we can sometimes be irritated with, uncomfortable with, not wanting to do, questioning whether we want to even continue doing this. And I love working with folks who are definitely at that point, like, is this even really what I want to do with my life anymore? Because oftentimes they're just so burnt out that they're just looking to do sort of a simpler job, right? Like go to their local market and be on the cash register. Not that that isn't consuming emotionally as well, but, how do we take a job that keeps us up here, racking it up all the time and do something that feels just a little bit more simpler? And again, that's usually not the case. We want to do the passionate thing. We just have to find a way to do it more sustainably.
Yeah. And you mentioned boundaries there and confusing roles, especially for our clients and our listeners who we don't have kids. Maybe we have a partner or we don't have a partner. And it can be really hard to sometimes draw those boundaries because if soloists, it's just you and checking in on yourself. Whereas those of us in relationships, we've got a partner, but sometimes it can be easier, especially if you're both really driven by your work too. You just kind of feed off of each other of, oh, yeah, I got to keep working, keep working, keep working. So how do we draw those boundaries and actually put those into place?
Yeah. One thing I would encourage folks to notice is your energy, right? Like if you are filling all of your small bits of time with things that just like use up your energy in a way that doesn't really feel good, then like, how do we renegotiate that? So like, how do you do the deep work when you're feeling the most energized? And whether that's through the day, through the week, through the month, like paying attention to when those ebbs and flows happen for you, right? And that's important because once we start delegating our energy onto sort of the things that we're prioritizing differently, that's going to help us to also have energy to show up for the people around us. And you're right, when we're a solo person and we don't have like that feedback, or we even have a partner who are either super driven or maybe just very independent, and it's just easy for you to kind of go off on your two places. After you identify what that energy level is, again, you're going to be able to better understand like, okay, maybe Monday through Thursday is not the time where I go have my date with my partner or go take myself out for something to enjoy. Recognizing like, I'm going to be exhausted Monday through Thursday, so Friday night will be my date night. Recognizing that. And I think the other piece that goes along with that is, really understanding, how I want to say this, when we are addressing where our boundaries need to be, it can be really useful to identify also what our values are. And so, yes, we have this passion, we have this value that relates to our career, but also our values also related to the people we connect with, our hobbies, the other things out in the world. And so the values that we have aren't just going to be professionally driven. They're going to be personally driven too. And so when we set those boundaries for ourselves based on our energy, we're actually going to be more likely to sort of naturally understand where our values need to be reprioritized to. And so that can help us make those shifts, recognizing where your energy is, and then being able to say, hey, if my energy doesn't feel right here, that I need to set some better boundaries around that. And when I'm much more energized, then I also need to set some appropriate boundaries around that to know that I'm not going to be swirling around in my email. I'm going to go, take care of myself. I'm going to go take a walk with the dog, do the deep work that feels really good. And so it's kind of a blend of a few things to really recognize, like, where do we put the boundaries down and what's going to be important to us and how do we make sure we're aligning with that going forward.
And you said kind of not checking the emails, all those things, and really aligning with that energy. How do you put that into place when at times I truly do wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and just feel very, very energized? And my spouse travels a ton for work. And so I find myself when they're gone, those are the days I'll work a ton. And then when they're around, I'll maybe work fewer days and just kind of align it with that. And it works out well for me. I have meetings, I go to my meetings, I do all those things. But that can also be not necessarily the best in the sense of spreading things out, because then we're piling things on certain days and we're not putting on other days. How do we take and make those boundaries tactical once we've identified where our energy is and kind of how we want it? Because that's where I see a lot of struggle is, you know what you want, but you don't actually know how to make that step.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really great question. So one thing I'm going to encourage, and kind of going back to what we said before, like, what's uncomfortable about this, right? Like, if you know the boundary's there, if you've said I'm committing to this boundary and then you don't do the boundary, what's going on there? Is it because you're just not paying enough attention to it? You're in old habit. Let's think about that. Maybe we need to make ourselves some different note, put some reminders out there for us. Or perhaps you are uncomfortable with the boundary for some reason, right? Like maybe you're feeling overwhelmed because you do want to spend all of that time with your partner when the time's available. But then, when they're not around, you're overworking yourself to a point where maybe it actually doesn't feel as good. Maybe you're, showing up in these ways that don't actually feel well. Recognizing like, okay, once I set the boundary, if I'm still not willing to commit to it, follow through with it, something else is going on there. And again, it may be a message that I hold that I picked up when I was a little kid, that rest has to be earned. And so I had to do all of this work and then I'll be able to like really enjoy the time with my partner or enjoy the time with myself. Or again, it might be some nervous system dysregulation. And this is something I've been seeing more and more recently. Like folks have the ability to recognize where they're not being productive enough. They have the ability to recognize where they need the boundaries, but then they just can't keep the boundary consistently. They can't keep it sustainably. And so they try to implement it. It might work for a few weeks, and then they go back to defaulting to doing whatever unhealthy or unhappy thing they were doing before. And that lets me know like, okay, something's going on here. Your nervous system might be operating from a place of anxiety and stress and maybe even survival to some degree. And that's not something we can outthink. That's not something we can say, oh, I just need to be more productive or I just need to commit better to these boundaries. That's something that you need to probably do some more deeper somatic work on to just help regulate the nervous system. Because when the nervous system automatically goes on operating mode, there's not really an ability for the brain to kind of compete with that sometimes. Like you might be able to have the cognitive thought, but the brain is not going to be able to make the actual shift that you want. And so nervous system regulation truly just means, how do we calm the body a little bit, but also how do we get the body and brain to work better, work on the same page? So that way it's not competing. It's not one's overworking and then the other one is like lazy on the couch. No, how do we like make them work together? How do we get them to interact better? And that can often help people to just more naturally put in boundaries that feel good for them, that they honor, and that there's way less resistance, if any.
What does that work look like? What are the things you go through, questions you ask, practices you have clients work on in order to make those changes and stick to them?
Yeah, really great question. So I always like to start with kind of like the surface stuff, right? Like, let's look at your calendar. If you don't have specific blocks for certain days where you're going to see clients versus where you're going to do deep work versus where you're going to take care of yourself, like let's look at some of those things. Some people are just so used to, especially when they come from like a 9-to-5 corporate lifestyle and they transition to being a business owner, they can really recognize like, I'm still operating under that same mode where I think I have to work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And that can be useful sometimes, but oftentimes, like the reason you become a business owner or the reason you get into a career that has more flexibility is because you want to be able to enjoy that. You want to have more autonomy in these things. So sometimes we're just looking at the surface stuff to begin with. Where do we make these changes? And then it's kind of like a curious experiment after that. Like, are you able to make those changes? Did that feel good? Was there resistance to it? Did you think about the boundary and say, absolutely not, and go do the thing that you're used to doing? Those are all good signs to say something's going on here for me. Another thing I like to encourage folks to do when we're in that experiment phase is really notice like what's happening in your body. And this can take some work to kind of get used to make a connection with, because if you are a super ambitious person, there's also a good chance you don't have a very good sense of what's happening in your body because you're kind of used to living in your head. And so there might be some practice to really sit down and think, wait, what's that feeling when I sit down in front of this client I really don't enjoy working with? What's happening in my body? Oh, it's anxiety. Where does that anxiety live? Oh, it's in my chest. What does that feel like? And really like painting a picture for yourself of what that internal experience is like. Because that's also a good sort of signal to say, is this something that's happening in my brain, or is this something that's happening so much in my body that it doesn't matter how many good techniques or tips that I have, I just can't quite sign on to that thing. And I like to kind of do that surface stuff. I like to experiment a little bit and say, hey, what's really going on here? Let's pay more attention to it. And then going from there to determine, is this something that we need to change cognitively? Is this a thought that's really getting us stuck up? Or is this some sort of somatic issue that's making us feel really dysregulated in the moment? Oftentimes, it's a little bit of a blend of both, but I tend to notice it can be more of a regulation issue, nervous system regulation issue, than it tends to be something that's only getting us stuck in our head.
Is there any like particular factor right now, because you said you've been seeing a lot of it lately, that's really triggering that nervous system dysregulation?
I don't know that it's something that's like triggering the nervous system dysregulation. I think as a society, we're just like so much more connected to everything. Information is so much more accessible for us. And so if we're not paying attention to how we process things, how things land on us, if we're taking in the nightly news and it's stressing us out and we're not doing anything with that stress, that's going to cause us to have like a dysregulated nervous system. But I think that the reason I'm especially seeing the trend in it is because I think as a society, we're also just becoming much more aware of it. That for many years, for many decades, with the exception of maybe our ancestors, we have just really been living in our head, and we have just kind of been avoiding any emotional discomfort that's been happening for us. And truly, that's just been out of survival. If the generation before you doesn't know how to take care of their emotions, they're not really going to be able to teach you how to take care of them. And because we've had wars, issues, societal uprising for many, many hundreds of years, that only builds up over time. And I think we're finally coming to a place in society where we're recognizing like who we are as a human is body and brain. It's not just brain. It's not just survival. It's not just success. It's how do we like survive and thrive through things as well. And so I think it's a little bit combination of like us being super connected and maybe not knowing how to process things in a way that actually feels good and gets it out of our system. But also I think us just coming to more of an awareness that we don't have this body-brain connection the way that we really need to and should. But we also don't really have great information out there yet as to how to take care of that. And so a lot of people are coming to a place of recognizing, I'm a problem solver. And so I'm Googling and I'm reading and I'm learning listening to all the podcasts to try and fix the situation. And I just can't get to a place where I feel regulated, happy, content on a day-to-day basis. And so they come to therapists and say, why don't I feel okay? And we say, well, you got to look at the whole thing. And that's kind of where we start with it.
Okay. So it definitely is a whole lot of combinations, factors. You mentioned watching the nightly news. I do not watch the nightly news. I will tell that to anybody and everybody. I do not watch the news on TV specifically for the reason of I feel very dysregulated when I do. I read a lot of things. I am consistently reading a ton. And I realize that the way I feel reading versus the way I feel watching is 1,000 times different. And I feel so much better and I can digest information properly without getting dysregulated if I read the news and read information versus watching everything on TV.
Yeah, that's a really great self-awareness. It's not that you have to cut the news out of your life completely, right? And sometimes people go to that extreme. They say, this makes me uncomfortable, so I'm just going to cut it out completely. And I can say, and like, let's figure out a way to make a connection to it, but in a way that feels right for us. So maybe we need to have some boundaries. No news on TV, but I will read the news in a newspaper, or I will read the news online. And so I think it's all about experimenting. It's all about being curious with yourself, right? There's no one way to exist in this world. And that's sort of one of the beautiful things about being human. When you're ambitious, when you might be type A perfectionist, tend to want the instructions. You tend to want the formula that's going to get you from A to B. And that's not really how being a human is.
Yeah. Humans, I think for many of us who are very A students, it can be really hard because you know exactly what to do all throughout school to get that A, to get that gold star that we often talk about. And then you move on, you're entrepreneurial and you're just doing all these things, and that's not there anymore. You have to figure it out along the way. And that can be really, really hard. And I think part of that can be part of going from that, I know exactly what to do to get the A, to having to figure it out, can be part of the reason people end up in burnout, and then justify that as part of the process. What do you think about that? Do you see the same thing? Am I maybe off base there?
Yeah, no, that's completely accurate. Not only like passion-driven work can tend to make us personalize the work we're doing, but really just when you are the type of person where you just sort of want the answers, you want to move forward with things, and you don't have that built-in support, you might at an organization or you might in other situations, you are going to personalize things quite often. And it's going to feel hard to step away from that, especially when you've already built so much of your identity around this one thing. And so it can be really painful for people to recognize, as wonderful and important as this thing is, you have to set up some space around it so that you can feel a little bit better, so that you can have better balance, because it is way easier for us to justify toxic work culture, burnout, like things that are not good for us because, you believe in the mission, or this is just part of the process in being a business owner or doing passion-driven work. And it can be really easy to just say, but this is what I have to do to get the end result. But there are other ways to get there to get the end result. But if you're only used to doing it this one default way, because that's how our society teaches it, you're going to eventually come to a place where you say, this isn't working. And that could be especially scary if that's how you feel like you became successful, right? Like if you feel like this is how I made my success, you're not going to want to give up that tool, that technique, that personality trait, however you're defining it. But the reality is that we don't have to give it up. We just have to modify it again so it works better. So it works in combination with us, not against us all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really important there. You said how it can work for us, not against us, and figuring that out. It goes back to what you were saying earlier about testing different things out, testing out to see how things feel and how things just work. And maybe you try something, it doesn't work, and you got to try something else. And that can be kind of scary and kind of difficult at times to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when, again, you've built so much of your identity around this one specific thing that you feel you're really super good at. And now you have to go try something that maybe you've never tried before. Maybe you're not going to be so good at. But I love to remind people that, life is the journey, right? Like I always say to folks, I've never tried this thing before. So either way, it's going to be an adventure. Like I'm either going to like it, I'm going to want to try it again, or it's going to be a story I'm going to have to tell about this time where I was not very good at this thing. And so recognizing it's all about trying things out. It's all about being curious, but that also naturally is going to cause some discomfort, some worry, some trepidation. Something I like to encourage folks to do is using the worth it test. Is this worth it? Yeah. Is this worth it? Does it feel good? Do I feel energized by it? Yeah, if I'm feeling a little nervous and that nervousness is kind of normal in the sense of I haven't tried this thing before, is the adventure and experience worth it to me? Those are also important questions. If the worth it test is telling me it's a resounding yes, that's a good information for me. That's good information for me to take in. But if it's saying, I don't know, I'm not really sure, I'm not feeling so great about it, that's an important thing to also say, hey, is this because I really don't want to do it? It's really not aligning with my energy. It doesn't align with my values. It doesn't fill me up. Or is this kind of that normal experience of, I'm just not really sure I want to try this out? And all of that is just important information for you to take in your self-awareness to better understand how to make the next decision.
With that, the worth it test, let's say I do something, I think it's worth it in the moment. Afterwards I do it and I'm like, that was awful. I don't want to do that again. How do I prevent resistance to then trying things again and even saying that something else is worth it?
Yeah. Well, first start like identifying what was it you didn't like? Is it because you weren't immediately good at it? Then that's a good signal to say, oh, maybe you need to identify some different expectations to have for new experiences. So it can be really difficult for folks to not get on that track of I'm just never going to do anything new again. But really like questioning yourself, like, calling yourself out to say, is this just new discomfort that I didn't want to stretch myself or I didn't want to not be perfect in? Or is this something like my gut is telling me, no, I didn't like that. That didn't feel good. And that's really important to know. And I think really, as much as I say, use your gut, like that is also something you might need to cultivate, especially for women. But I think in our society generally, we have a tendency of toning down what our intuition is. Mistrust your intuition. Don't think about that. Stay up in your brain. That's only going to work for so long. And so you might need to, build some of your intuition, build some of that ability to say, what was my experience about? How am I feeling? Was that discomfort normal discomfort because I was trying something new? Or was it discomfort because it was really signaling to me that something wasn't right, something wasn't good for me? And so I always like to say, have little conversations with yourself. You're probably already doing that. Just try to make them a little more intentional instead of going immediately into the conversation that might be really negativity based, really like putting yourself down. I think that's easy for us as humans to go to. Hey, okay, that could all be true. And also, what would this conversation look like if I was being curious about what my experience was instead of judgmental?
I like that. I think it's so, so important. I have over the years tried to put myself in situations in which I am uncomfortable. And there are times when I'm a lot better at doing that. And there are times where I just don't do as much of that and kind of realize when I need to practice that. But it's always something that is, to me, it usually is worth it to at least try it and at least say, hey, I was really good at that and that was a lot of fun, or I really suck at that and I don't want to do that again, or I really suck at that, but I want to get better at that too.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many different options here to like explore what something actually felt like for us. It's not a dichotomy. It's not either I'm never doing it again or I'll continue to do it. Maybe this is something I'd like to do, but maybe next time, maybe I'll try it with a friend or I'll try it with a specific friend who I know is going to be maybe a good support system or maybe really encouraging. I think even our most extroverted humans out there can even have discomfort around trying something new. And so this isn't plague that is just experienced by one part of our population. Like we all feel discomfort. We all feel uncertainty when we're trying something new. But the folks who can have pretty intentional conversations with themselves about like, well, what's going on here? What is uncomfortable about the situation? They're more likely to continue doing the thing rather than someone who says, no, I don't like it. And period. I'm not going to look any further into it.
Yeah. And to me, it's so fun to have conversations with people who recognize that things are difficult but do want to try it. And I don't really like having a conversation with somebody when they're like, no, I'm never trying that again. It's not that exciting or stimulating to me. I love having conversations though when people say, yeah, it was hard, it sucked, but I really want to try it. I really want to get better. And I want to see what that's like, because to me, that is so incredibly stimulating and just fun to watch people in their pursuit of different things that maybe I'm not good at. And maybe I'm not good at them either, but you can watch that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just more inspiring, right? It helps us to remember like, oh, we don't have to be great at something. We can fail. We can be messy around things. And truly, like so much of life is lived in the messiness. And so, yeah, if we can get a little more comfortable with that, if we can share that discomfort with other people, I think that can be something that's just really easy for us to get in like a shame place about, right? Like where we don't want to tell people something that was uncomfortable or something that we're going through, especially when we are driven by our passions, but we're struggling with that passion for whatever reason. Like that can be uncomfortable to share with people because we're worried about that judgment. But actually like the connection, the excitement, the inspiring parts of life is when we're able to share that with each other. When we're able to be just a little bit vulnerable, a little bit honest and say, hey, this is what my experience was. And I'd love to to share that with you. I'd love to talk about it. And just being able to hear other people's stories. I mean, I think that's where we really, not only feel good making connections with other people, but we feel good about ourselves too, because we see that life is reflected in kind of the messy parts. We see that in other people.
Yeah, that's so incredibly important. I have one more question that I wanted to ask you about. So you talked about creating passion-free zones. Can you tell us more about what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. You need a space where work doesn't exist, right? And so I call them passion-free zones for some of my folks. We might also think of them as like a third space. So a place where work isn't existing, where it's not home, it's not work, it's this other place we're going to do something. So maybe that's a hobby, maybe that's social time, maybe it's even just exercising. We're committing to this thing. We're committing to this non-work activity. I would love to say every day, but I know sometimes that could be a hard jump for people. And so at least making the commitment for once a week, right? Having that space where not only you're cultivating your social skills, your interactions in another space, but you're also cultivating your identity differently. So you're giving yourself some space to enjoy life, experience yourself outside of this thing that has really, fueled a lot of your passion. And that can give you an ability to feel better about yourself, get perspectives outside of life. I think it's also important too, because it gives us an ability to feel inspired, to allow our creativity to kind of be out in the world, as opposed to only just focusing on this passionate project that we have. And so having some passion-free zones where work doesn't have to exist, where we can do whatever it is that feels good, or we're learning, or whatever that growth piece is for us, and then just committing to engaging with it at least once a week or a few times a week. Daily is amazing, but again, not all of us have that capacity to do that. Recognizing where your energy is and where would feel right to sort of enjoy life a little bit more, and then making the commitment to engage with it nearly as much as you do the passionate stuff.
Hey listeners, like what you're hearing? Don't miss a thing. Sign up for the Child Free Wealth newsletter for weekly tips, tools, and podcast updates. Head to childfreewealth.com/newsletter to get on the list. Yeah, I love that, having that space there. Can you give some tips for people who, because we're such in a remote world now, we don't really have two spaces, Our home is also where we work, and then might be where we do the other things. How do we put that in such a remote world where so many people are working from home?
Sure. Yeah. If you have a situation that you can close off your passions into a specific room, right? And so if you have the privilege of having several rooms in your house, saying, okay, that's the room I do all my passionate stuff in. So once I leave there, that's it. I'm separating that space. But I think for most people, when you're working from home, when your first and second space are the same place, I really, really encourage people to find something outside of their house. So go to the local library, go to the local cafe, even if you bring your laptop there and do a little passion-inspired work, fine. Try to bring a book. Try to bring a coloring book if you feel okay doing that in public. Doing something outside, but that is easy to get to, is easy to make a connection to. So we're not saying drive a half an hour to go to your nearest park and go for a hike. We're saying go to the coffee shop. That's like a 10-minute drive. Maybe it's a 10-minute walk. So not only are you creating that separation, that other space from what you're used to being in all the time, but again, on top of that, you're seeing familiar faces, you're making connections with people, you're utilizing your basic social skills, which I think everyone who works from home panics a little about, if they can still have social interactions outside of the house. And so when you're engaging with those in ways that are super light, super easygoing, you're just, asking for your coffee, maybe you're having some very basic conversation, those can feel really good. And again, can lead to a surprising amount of creativity and inspiration, just because we're just giving ourselves some time outside of that passion specific zone that we have. Finding something that's outside of the house, or if you're someone who just absolutely loves being home, does not want to leave, does not want to go anywhere else besides your house, that's totally fine. But having something that you can commit to, and perhaps connecting it to something. So either a specific time of the day or a specific thing that you tend to do all the time that isn't very passion-led. So drinking your coffee in the morning, maybe that's your time to do some stretching, to do some journaling, to do some coloring. Do some dancing, even whatever it is that's going to whatever it is that's just going to help you enjoy those few moments. That's fine. You don't have to leave the house to do that, but you do need to make that commitment to say, I'm spending time here doing this that's passion related, and then I'm going to do this that's personally passion related, and really just making that commitment to the two differences.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all you've shared and all the wonderful knowledge you've given us today. There's a lot to learn from this and things I can already take away for myself and practice working on to build a better work-life balance, because it can be really hard when you love what you do to shut that off at times. For those listening, where can they find you?
Yeah. Find me on my website, jennifergraycounseling.com. I do have some social medias, but you'll find all of that through the website.
Wonderful. Thank you again today for joining me, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bri. This was a great conversation.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available, or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Child Free Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.